Have you ever wondered why certain people get under your skin so intensely? Why a colleague's behavior drives you to frustration while others barely notice it? Or why you find yourself repeatedly clashing with the same personality types throughout your life? What if these difficult relationships aren't random accidents, but precise psychological mirrors, reflecting back parts of yourself you've refused to see? What if your enemies, those people who trigger your strongest reactions, are actually holding pieces of your own identity that you've rejected or denied? Tonight, we'll continue our journey into Jung's revolutionary psychology, building directly on our exploration of the shadow from our previous discussion. But this time, we're moving from theory into the living laboratory of your daily interactions. And I promise you, what you'll discover about projection might completely transform how you view every difficult relationship in your life. Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you'll have a powerful tool for turning your greatest irritations into doorways of self-discovery. The final revelation about your enemies might just change everything. Have you ever found yourself intensely bothered by someone without fully understanding why? Perhaps it's a colleague whose confidence strikes you as arrogance. Maybe it's a friend whose neediness exhausts you. Or perhaps it's a political figure whose every word seems to trigger an almost visceral response. Jung would suggest something remarkable about these reactions: that their intensity often reveals more about you than about the other person. This is the mechanism of projection at work. But what exactly is projection? Imagine your mind as containing a powerful film projector. When there are parts of yourself you can't accept, your psyche does something ingenious. It projects these disowned qualities onto the external world, particularly onto other people. It's as if your mind says, "I don't want to acknowledge this part of myself, so I'll see it out there instead." Think of it as your shadow, those disowned parts we discussed previously, casting itself onto others like images on a screen. The result? You find yourself surrounded by people who mysteriously embody the very traits you've been working hardest to suppress or deny. This process happens automatically and unconsciously. You don't decide to project. It happens without your awareness or permission. In fact, that's precisely why projection is so powerful as a psychological mechanism. It operates beneath the radar of consciousness, allowing us to maintain our preferred self-image while still experiencing the disowned qualities through others. Let's make this concrete with an example. Consider James, a manager known for his harsh criticism of lazy employees. He prides himself on his work ethic and productivity. Yet, strangely, he's constantly surrounded by people he perceives as underperforming. Is he uniquely unfortunate in his colleagues? Or might he be projecting something? Through therapy, James discovered a hidden truth. He had suppressed his own natural need for rest and balance. Raised with the belief that idle hands are the devil's workshop, he had pushed away his own legitimate need for downtime, seeing it as weakness. What he labeled as laziness in others was actually his disowned need for moderation and self-care, a need his psyche was desperately trying to acknowledge through projection. The irony is that James's obsession with identifying laziness in others was actually causing him to miss their genuine strengths and contributions. His projections weren't just hurting him, they were distorting his perceptions of reality and damaging his relationships. This is the double cost of projection. We lose access to parts of ourselves while simultaneously misperceiving others. Remember in our last discussion how we explored the energy required to keep parts of ourselves in shadow? Projection is where we see that energy reappearing as intensified reactions to others. It's like psychological conservation of energy. What's suppressed internally must emerge externally. But here's the fascinating thing about projection that we'll explore next. The intensity of your emotional reaction is actually your greatest clue, a doorway leading directly to your own disowned parts. And this is where your enemies become your most valuable teachers. Now, let's bring this directly into your life. Think for a moment about someone who really gets under your skin. Perhaps it's a specific personality type that always seems to rub you the wrong way. What qualities in this person trigger you most strongly? Once you've identified this person and quality, ask yourself this challenging question. In what way might this trigger relate to a disowned aspect of myself? This doesn't mean the other person doesn't possess this quality. They likely do. That's why your projection found a suitable hook to hang itself on. But why does their expression of this quality provoke such an intense reaction in you when others might respond more mildly? Jung would suggest that your emotional intensity is the clue. The stronger your reaction, the more likely it points to shadow material. If someone's behavior merely annoys you, it might just be an incompatibility. But if it enrages you, disgusts you, or creates obsessive thoughts, you're likely encountering a projection. Consider the famous feud between Mozart and Salieri portrayed in the film Amadeus. Salieri's consuming jealousy of Mozart's talent represented his own disowned creative spirit. His rage wasn't just about Mozart's behavior. It was about the spontaneity and brilliance he couldn't acknowledge in himself. Or think about how in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker had to literally face Darth Vader, his father who represented the shadow side of the Force, before he could become a true Jedi. This mythic pattern appears constantly in our culture because it reflects a psychological truth. We must face our projections to become whole. In your own life, consider Laura, who found herself intensely irritated by a new team member who spoke up confidently in meetings. She's so full of herself, Laura would think, always has to be the center of attention. Yet other colleagues found this new person refreshing and insightful. Through reflection, Laura realized she had suppressed her own voice due to childhood experiences where she was told not to show off. Her strong reaction wasn't about her colleagues' behavior, it was about her own disowned desire to be seen and heard. The beauty of this realization is that it offered Laura a choice. Instead of remaining trapped in judgment, she could ask, what would it look like for me to reclaim my voice? How might I express my ideas more confidently? Her irritation became a doorway to growth. And here's where enemies become teachers. Each strong projection offers a window into your own unconscious, a chance to reclaim a disowned part of yourself. Each difficult person becomes a messenger, carrying a part of your psyche that's seeking reintegration. This doesn't mean you need to suddenly appreciate behaviors that genuinely conflict with your values. Rather, it means distinguishing between simple preferences and projection-driven reactions. When you feel that telltale intensity, the reaction that seems bigger than the situation warrants, you found a golden opportunity for self-discovery. In our next section, we'll explore the specific patterns of projection that appear most commonly in relationships, helping you identify your own unique projection profile. But before we go there, consider this question. What if the qualities that most disturb you in others are actually the exiled parts of yourself, knocking at the door of your consciousness, asking to be let in? Let's explore some common projections that occur in everyday relationships and what they might reveal about your shadow. Projection. They're so controlling. Possible shadow aspect. Your own disowned need for order, structure, or influence. Perhaps you've suppressed your own desire to assert boundaries or lead. Think of how in The Devil Wears Prada, many employees projected their own disowned ambition onto Miranda Priestly, seeing only her controlling nature rather than recognizing their own unexpressed desire for excellence and impact. Projection. They're so needy and dependent. Possible shadow aspect. Your own disowned vulnerability and need for connection. Perhaps you've been taught that self-sufficiency is the only acceptable way to be. Remember how in Good Will Hunting, Will projects his fear of vulnerability onto relationships, seeing others as needy when they seek connection, until he finally faces his own profound need for attachment. Projection. They're so fake and people-pleasing. Possible shadow aspect. Your own disowned adaptability and desire for approval. Perhaps you've rejected your natural social sensitivity. Projection. They're so selfish. Possible shadow aspect. Your own disowned self-interest and self-care needs. Perhaps you've been taught that considering your own needs is wrong. Projection. They're so judgmental. Possible shadow aspect. Your own inner critic that you've tried to silence. Perhaps you've disowned your own evaluative capacities. Projection. They are so irresponsible. Possible shadow aspect. Your own disowned spontaneity and resistance to constraint. Perhaps you've suppressed your natural desire for freedom. These projections don't occur randomly. They often cluster around our core wounds and the parts of ourselves we've most thoroughly rejected. If you were criticized for showing emotion as a child, you might find yourself particularly triggered by emotionally expressive people. If you were pressured to achieve, you might find yourself judging those who prioritize balance and enjoyment. Remember the executive we met in our discussion about the shadow? His irritation with overly emotional colleagues revealed his own suppressed emotional nature. By recognizing this projection, he not only improved his relationships, but also discovered a wealth of emotional intelligence he'd been denying himself. Understanding these patterns requires honest self-reflection. It means asking difficult questions when you feel triggered. What might this reveal about me? What am I not wanting to see in myself? This isn't about self-blame, but self-discovery, the kind of honest inquiry that leads to genuine psychological freedom. And here's something important to remember. Projection isn't just about negative qualities. We often project our greatest strengths and potentials onto others too. This leads us to our next revelation, how projection shapes not just our conflicts, but our attractions and deepest connections. There's a fascinating twist to Jung's understanding of projection that you might find surprising. It doesn't just fuel our animosities, it also drives our attractions. In fact, Jung believed that romantic attraction often begins with powerful, positive projections. Have you ever been instantly drawn to someone, feeling an almost magical connection? Or perhaps you've experienced the opposite, an immediate, unexplainable dislike? Both reactions can indicate projection at work. Think about the classic film Jerry Maguire and the famous line, "You complete me." This captures perfectly what Jung understood about romantic projection. We often fall in love with people who seem to embody qualities we sense within ourselves but haven't yet developed. In romantic relationships, we often project our positive shadow qualities onto partners, those golden aspects of ourselves we haven't yet recognized or developed. We're drawn to people who embody what we sense is possible for us but haven't yet claimed. This explains why early romance often feels so intoxicating. We're not just meeting another person, we're encountering disowned parts of ourselves that feel like coming home. It also explains why disillusionment commonly follows. As the projection starts to dissolve, we see the real person, not the carrier of our projected material. Jung called this process falling in love with our own unconscious. The qualities that most attract us in others often reflect potentials within ourselves that we haven't yet developed or acknowledged. Your attraction to someone's creativity, confidence, or compassion may signal these same qualities waiting to be developed within you. This understanding transforms how we might view relationship challenges. The disillusionment phase of relationships, that sobering moment when our partner's flaws become apparent, can actually be a profound opportunity. It signals the return of our projections and invites us to develop these qualities ourselves rather than expecting our partners to embody them for us. This creates a profound opportunity. Jung suggested that our closest relationships can become vessels for mutual growth when we recognize projections for what they are. Rather than blaming our partners when disillusionment sets in, we can ask, what part of myself am I meeting through this person? Consider Maria, who was initially drawn to her partner's confidence and decisiveness, qualities she had suppressed in herself due to early criticism. When their relationship hit difficulties, she realized she had been unconsciously expecting him to express these qualities for both of them. By recognizing this projection, she began developing her own confidence rather than seeking it through him. Their relationship transformed as her projections diminished. What's remarkable about this process is how it can shift relationship dynamics from dependency to partnership. Instead of unconsciously using others to experience disowned parts of ourselves, we reclaim these parts and bring our whole selves to our relationships. The result? More authentic connections based on seeing the other person clearly, rather than as a screen for our projections. In our next section, we'll explore something even more fascinating: how projection operates not just between individuals, but at collective levels, shaping our politics, culture, and society. But before we move on, I invite you to consider, what qualities do you consistently admire or feel drawn to in others? Could these be clues to undeveloped aspects of yourself? While we focused on personal projections, Jung recognized that projection also operates at collective levels with far-reaching consequences. Groups, organizations, and entire societies project their collective shadow onto convenient targets. History offers tragic examples: the scapegoating of minorities, the demonization of other nations, even the witch trials, where communities projected their own repressed impulses onto witches. In each case, what the group couldn't face in itself, it saw and attacked in others. This pattern continues today. Political polarization often reflects massive shadow projections, with each side seeing the other as embodying all they reject. Media and social networks amplify these projections, creating caricatured enemies that conveniently carry our collective shadow. Think about films like The Hunger Games or V for Vendetta, which portray societies projecting their fears and disowned qualities onto scapegoated groups or individuals. These stories resonate because they capture a psychological truth about how collective projection operates. Consider how political discourse has become increasingly polarized. Rather than seeing opposing viewpoints as different but valid perspectives, we often demonize those who disagree with us. The language becomes extreme. They're not just wrong, they're evil, dangerous, or destroying society. This intensity signals projection at work. Jung believed that recognizing collective projection is essential for social healing. When societies project their shadow, rather than integrating it, destructive consequences follow, from discrimination to war. But when a culture begins acknowledging its shadow sides, it can evolve toward greater wholeness. Consider how nations that have explicitly confronted dark chapters in their history often develop more mature cultural identities than those maintaining selective narratives. Germany's unflinching acknowledgement of its Nazi past, for instance, has contributed to its development as a leader in human rights and democracy. Organizations experience this same dynamic. Companies that can honestly assess their weaknesses rather than projecting blame outward tend to innovate and adapt more successfully. Teams that can acknowledge shared responsibility for problems rather than seeking scapegoats develop stronger collaboration. This collective dimension reminds us that projection isn't just a personal psychological mechanism. It's a social force that shapes cultures, politics, and history. By developing awareness of our own projections, we not only transform our personal relationships, but potentially contribute to broader social healing as well. But now, let's turn to what you've been waiting for. Practical techniques to transform your projections from unconscious reactions into tools for growth and self-discovery. In our next section, I'll share specific practices that will help you recognize and reclaim your projections, turning your enemies into your greatest teachers. How do we transform projection from an unconscious pattern into a tool for growth? How do we make our enemies our teachers? Here are 5 practical approaches that you can begin using immediately. 1. Track emotional intensity. When you notice an unusually strong emotional reaction to someone, pause. This is your projection detection system at work. Take a moment to check in with your body. Where do you feel the reaction physically? Is there tightness in your chest? A knot in your stomach? These physical sensations are reliable indicators of projection. Next, ask yourself, why does this particular behavior trigger me so strongly? What might it reflect about me? The key is to turn your attention inward rather than fixating on the other person's behavior. Try this. For the next week, carry a small notebook or use your phone to record moments of strong emotional reaction. Note what triggered you, how intensely you felt it on a scale of 1 to 10, and any insights about what this might reveal about yourself. Just 5 minutes of reflection after each trigger can yield powerful insights. 2. Look for patterns. Notice if you repeatedly encounter similar, difficult people. Do you always seem to find selfish friends, irresponsible colleagues, or controlling authority figures? These patterns often reveal ongoing projections. Try the 3 relationship audit. Write down the 3 most difficult relationships in your current life. For each person, list the qualities that most irritate you. Look for commonalities. Then ask, when in my life was I criticized, shamed, or punished for showing these qualities? Often, our strongest projections connect to early experiences where we learn to suppress parts of ourselves. 3. Practice the "it's me" experiment. When triggered by someone, try this thought experiment. If this trait I'm seeing actually belongs to me in some form, what might that mean? This isn't about self-blame, but self-discovery. For example, if you're triggered by someone's attention-seeking behavior, you might ask, how might I be denying my own need for recognition or visibility? Then spend 10 minutes journaling on how this quality might actually serve you if expressed consciously and appropriately. Remember the scene in The Lion King when Rafiki shows Simba his reflection? "Look harder," he says, showing Simba that his Father lives on in him. Similarly, our enemies often reflect parts of ourselves waiting to be recognized and integrated. 4. Dialogue with the projection. This powerful technique involves giving your projection a voice. Set aside 20 minutes in a private space with a journal. At the top of the page, write a question to the quality you see in others, such as, "Dear arrogance, what are you trying to show me?" Then, using your non-dominant hand, your left hand if you're right-handed, or vice versa, write a response as if the quality itself is answering. Allow whatever comes to emerge without censoring. This technique, adapted from Jung's active imagination process, often bypasses conscious defenses to reveal surprising wisdom. Many people discover that qualities they've judged harshly in others actually carry important messages and gifts when approached with curiosity rather than judgment. 5. Reclaim the projection. Once you identify a projection, look for healthy ways to express this quality yourself. If you project selfishness, experiment with appropriate self-care for 10 minutes daily. If you project irresponsibility, schedule small windows for spontaneity and play. Remember Robert, who constantly criticized his teenage son's wasteful approach to money? Through shadow work, Robert realized he was projecting his own suppressed desire for freedom and enjoyment. His depression lifted when he began allowing himself modest pleasures without guilt. And interestingly, his relationship with his son improved simultaneously as the projections diminished. Working with projection requires both courage and compassion. Courage to face disowned aspects of yourself and compassion for the very human tendency to project. Approach this work not as self-criticism, but as a journey of recovery, reclaiming parts of yourself that have been in exile. In our final section, we'll explore the ultimate gift that comes from transforming projection, a kind of psychological freedom that changes not just how you see others, but how you experience yourself in the world. As we conclude our exploration of projection, we arrive at Jung's most liberating insight. When we reclaim our projections, we not only heal relationships, we reclaim our wholeness. Each projection you recognize and integrate returns energy that was previously spent on judgment, reaction, and avoidance. Each enemy, transformed into a teacher, brings you closer to psychological freedom. Imagine moving through life without being unconsciously triggered by others' behavior. Imagine encountering difficult people with curiosity rather than reactivity. Imagine recognizing that your strongest irritations contain your greatest growth opportunities. This doesn't mean you'll suddenly appreciate everyone's behavior or that all difficult relationships will magically transform. Rather, you'll develop the capacity to distinguish between genuine incompatibilities and projection-driven reactions. You'll respond rather than react. Think of the transformation in Beauty and the Beast. What initially appeared monstrous gradually revealed itself as containing unexpected gifts and possibilities. Our projections work the same way. What seems most threatening often contains precisely what we need to become whole. The irony is profound. The very people you most want to avoid may be carrying the exact medicine your psyche needs. Your enemies, those people who trigger your strongest reactions, may indeed be your best teachers. As you move forward from tonight, I invite you to approach your relationships with new awareness. The next time someone triggers a strong reaction, rather than immediately focusing on their flaws, pause and wonder, what might I be seeing of myself in this person? Remember Jung's words, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Your enemies aren't obstacles to your growth. They're catalysts for it, reflecting back the parts of yourself waiting to be acknowledged and integrated. What disowned part of yourself might be seeking your attention through the people who challenge you most? Just as we discovered the power hidden in the shadow in our previous exploration, we now see the wisdom disguised as conflict. Each difficult relationship becomes an opportunity. Each projection recognized becomes energy reclaimed. And each enemy transformed into a teacher brings you one step closer to the wholeness that is your birthright. In our next session, we'll explore another powerful dimension of Jung's psychology, the archetypal patterns that shape our life journeys and give meaning to our experiences. But for now, I leave you with this question. What projection will you reclaim today?